It sounds like from the testimony today that he's being accused of selling drugs. So can he plead the fifth here?
Plead the fifth. I mean, it sounds like there may be both federal and state investigation possibly ongoing. So unless he's granted some sort of immunity, he can't be forced to testify.
All right. So we're going to have to, I guess, just wait and see how that part of this case plays out. How do you think that affects the defense if they can't get Maurice Hall to testify?
Well, I think they can't call him strictly for the purpose of him taking the fifth, but it seems to me that there are certain things that they can call him for in addition to taking the fifth, and then they can ask him the question that he will take the fifth on. And it certainly plays into the reasonable doubt as to what was the cause of that.
And then the other kind of interesting part that came out of this was when the defense asked Courtney Ross. They first started by asking what George Floyd's pet name for her was, and then he rephrased the question to, what did he have you saved in his phone as? How did he have you identified in his phone? And she got very emotional as she explained that, Mama, that's how George Floyd had her saved in his phone and how he referred to her on occasion. Now, we've all seen the video. One of the hardest parts to watch is when you hear Floyd calling out Mama. And up until this point, everyone has thought very definitively that he was calling out for his mother, who had pretty recently passed. Now, the prosecutor came out and asked Ross what he called his mother, and she explained he also called her Mama, and just sort of said the two things with a bit of a different intonation, so that, you know, it is still very possible that that is who he was calling for. But why do you think the defense thought that was an important enough string to pull on?
Well, I mean, I think there is a difference between him calling out for his mother or calling out for his girlfriend. I mean, but I wouldn't say it's a very significant issue. I mean, it's horrible and it's sad, regardless of whether or not he's calling for his mom or for his girlfriend at the time when he's suffering. And
we did talk a little bit about the earlier portion of Ross's testimony, where she got emotional right off the bat several times throughout the course of this testimony when talking about how she and George Floyd met, when talking about how he reacted to the loss of his mother, when she talked about the fact that he had kids. And so I want to play the beginning portion of that, where, as you described, she was kind of humanizing George Floyd, and get your reaction to that. Let's play that clip.
In August of 2017, I had
that was good with Kenneth.
Gotten off work one night. I worked at a coffee shop for
what,
22 years now, part-time, and I was tired and I just cleaned up and closed up the shop, and I went to go visit my son's father, who was staying at Harbor Lights, the Salvation Army shelter. He had had some difficulties and was staying there. I entered Harbor Lights, and when you visit there, you have to ask for a person to come down if you're visiting them. And so I had the receptionist call him down, but he didn't seem to be coming down, so I waited in the lobby, and I wanted to talk to him about our son's birthday. Excuse me. I was pretty upset, and I started kind of fussing in the corner of the lobby. And at one point, Floyd came up to me Floyd has this great, deep Southern voice, raspy. He's like, sis, you okay, sis? And I wasn't okay. I said, no, I'm just waiting for my son's father. Sorry. He said, well, can I pray with you? I thought I was so tired. We had been through so much, my sons and I. And this kind person just to come up to me and say, can I pray with you? When I felt alone in this lobby, it was so sweet. And at the time, I had lost a lot of faith in God.
Ms. Ross, sorry to interrupt, but I just going to want to maybe help with a few questions, okay?
Sure.
At that point, did you know what Mr. Floyd was doing there at the Salvation Army?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. He worked there as a security guard.
Okay. And so he came up to you and tried to comfort you?
Yes.
Okay. And was that the beginning of your relationship?
Well, not that part. That was just Floyd.
So again, that was George Floyd's girlfriend, Courtney Ross, talking a little bit about how she and George Floyd met and how their relationship started. And I want to go back to criminal defense attorney Bjorn Brunvand for more on this. Bjorn, I want to get into sort of the details and the limitations of Spark of Life testimonies in a second. But first, just talk a little bit about what kind of an impact a testimony like this, when you're kind of humanizing a victim of a crime, what impact could that have on the jury?
You know, I think it has tremendous impact. I mean, here is Mr. Floyd reaching out, extending an arm and a hand to a stranger, offering her help while she's in distress. And that's coming out in a trial where we've seen the video where people are standing on the sidewalk begging for help. We're seeing law enforcement doing absolutely nothing to assist him, regardless of what the cause of death is. And so it's incredibly powerful. I mean, that what we should have seen is someone from law enforcement should have said, wait a minute, what are we doing here? This guy needs help. He doesn't need to be placed in the back of a patrol car.
And why is that element to this case so important?
Well, because it's the opposite of what you see in the video. It's not only is it humanizing Mr. Floyd and humanizing his girlfriend, it's the opposite. It's the black and white of what happened in the case, and it emphasizes how horrific these videos are and what we witness in the body cam videos and the videos taken by others on the street.
Now, it is an interesting part of this case, though, because these testimonies where the witnesses are meant to humanize George Floyd, there are limitations on what these people can say. And Judge Cahill was very strict about that going into this trial. And part of that is because of the debate over how much of both Chauvin's and Floyd's past the attorneys can introduce into this case. And while the defense wanted to introduce a lot about George Floyd's past, the judge declared a lot of that inadmissible. But he also made clear that if friends and family come up and start testifying about George Floyd's character, that can open the door for the defense to start talking about parts of his past up until this point declared inadmissible. So can you just talk a little bit, Bjorn, about what you heard today? Because I heard you say you were surprised at how much they let Courtney Ross say today. Right.
I mean, we've seen it earlier in the trial. I'm trying to remember. It was when Darnell Frazier testified, and And it was actually, at that time, it was the defense that's, I believe, opened the door for the prosecution to come back and redirect and ask what became probably the most powerful part of her testimony, where she compared what she saw and the fear with her father, her brother, her cousins being the people that were in Mr. Floyd's position. So listening to her to the testimony today and the start of the testimony, it certainly opens the door, in my opinion. Now, the court may say to the defense, well, you didn't object. And so therefore, maybe it didn't open the door because you didn't object to the testimony as it was coming in. But it's such a difficult position for the defense to object to that. I mean, because the jury doesn't understand the legal aspects of it, and it may seem harsh to come in and object, as this woman is testifying and is very emotionally, obviously, about what has happened in her history with Mr. Floyd. So it's clearly borderline, in my opinion, and could have been objected to. I mean, maybe a motion in limine in advance would have been more appropriate. But I would suggest that certainly the door's been open for the defense to get into other aspects of Mr. Floyd's life.
So you think that door may already have been opened? Is that what you're saying?
I believe so, yes.